Hello and welcome to this special edition of To The Point. My guest this week is Simon Davies, founder of Privacy International and online privacy advocate as well. Many thanks for joining us on To The Point. First of all, to give our viewers a little background of what you really, your expertise lies in. Tell us a bit about online privacy as an issue per se, and how did you really get involved with all of this, and how far back for you does it all go?
Oh, well, this for me goes back 27 years. I'm now, I think, the longest surviving privacy advocate in the world. So you can see how recent this.
So you are the pioneers in that.
Well, that's a very flattering way of saying it. But it used to be, you see, that information was kept in, all these separate computer systems, and that it was a chore to move information around. So there were some safeguards, but what has happened, and this is where the big problems now have emerged, particularly for India, is this is a new age where information is instantly available in countless sources to countless people. And what I and hundreds of my colleagues around the world have been attempting to do over the past 2-3 decades is find a way that we can control that. So the power is in the hands of individuals to make decisions about what happens to their information, and yet we still give states the right to protect us.
Where do huge companies and corporations come into the picture? Say Google, for example.
Oh, well, see, this is an interesting question. So much of the data these days about us, the personal data, is stuff we give to these massive corporations. The corporations, of course, are not even based in our country. They're based very often in the United States. They're outside of any legal protections.
Offshore.
And although we do have some control, we have to remember that this information is not immediately available to us. It's also not necessarily available to our governments, which can be a good thing. But how do we, and this is what Europe is deciding now, how do we control these companies? Because it's all about money for them. It's all about profit. Google, for example, makes, in pure profit, $10 a year for every one of its billion users. It's going to keep accelerating that profit, accelerating the number of users, and it wants that information. It doesn't want it controlled. We say it has to be controlled because you can develop a dossier on a person that a national security agency couldn't even dream of.
Right, and that's scary for some people, and that worries a lot of people as well. The biggest case, online privacy-wise, I think was 2008, if I'm not wrong, Google, YouTube versus Viacom International, I think, and the judgment was passed in 2008. Tell us a bit about that, and why did Viacom really want that sort of information? Because they thought Google was hoarding it up, or Google just had it inadvertently?
Well, we never got the full story behind this, because so many of these relationships are all what they call commercial in confidence. But at a general level, what happens is that this body of personal information, these hundreds of millions, billions of files, become the main asset for a company, and other companies look very jealously at that. So if they have a relationship, they want access to it. Again, how do we as individuals control that? If we don't have a privacy law, and India doesn't, how do we exercise our right to say to a company, no, you cannot have this information, you can't make a profit out of information that I have freely given? The Viacom case with Google, with Facebook, this is all about extracting the maximum amount of money from your information. And nothing wrong with that, provided you do have some control and they've been honest with you about what they're doing.
You said at the time that, very famously I must add, that the chickens have come home to roost for Google. You also said that Google had ignored friendly advice for years about the same issue. Do you feel in retrospect, in hindsight, that Google could have done better, could have handled it better?
Well, it's no secret that I was public enemy #1 for Google for about 5 years, and not just on that, but I brought the original legal cases against.
Is that still the case? Do you have Gmail accounts?
Well, they invited me, strangely, they invited me to Mountain View, their headquarters, to do what they call a tech talk. So I was actually inside Mountain View. I met all of the executives, including Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt gave me a commitment that if I was prepared to stop the war against Google, then he would stop saying nasty things about me and my friends. Of course, the next day he forgot about this. But the thing is that the reason why there was a war, and still is with Google across the world, is that Google says, we don't care about privacy laws. We need to control the world's information. To do that, we have to write our own rule book. We can't have it written for us by governments. So there is a headlong battle going on. And in Europe at the moment, 6 governments, 6 national regulators have got together to coordinate an action against Google because of this. So when I said the chickens have come home to roost, I was saying, Google, you've gone on long enough. You can't continue doing this. You have to respect.
And not face consequences.
Exactly. And of course, now the consequences are coming home. There's now a competition inquiry in Europe against Google. They're all over the world. But if you could, I mean, look, Google is vast. If you could imagine, Google's got $100 billion in assets. Imagine that's $1 million home. All of the fines put together was like, it's like confiscating the garden gnome at the bottom of the
cab fare for those people.
It's nothing. So it's not a money issue. What's happening with Europe now, and again this concerns India, is Europe is starting to say, wait a minute, there's no amount of money we can take from them to stop them from breaking our privacy laws and doing what they want with people's information.
That stings them enough to stop them.
Exactly. So now the new law, I believe, and this is where India may have to be compliant with its, hopefully, new law, is it's going to have to recognize that Europe is going to start shutting down parts of Google and other companies that won't respect the law. It won't fine them. It will just say, you, by law, cannot have that service in our country. We will put you in front of the criminal court if necessary, and if you're in contempt of that court, your executives go to prison. That's already happened in
You've
Italy.
been working with the European regulators as well. You were supposed to file a report as well. I mean, you were involved in that as well. You told us what the scenario in Europe is and how Europe really looks at privacy, online privacy issues, and they might be considering action against companies like Google and other big corporations. Currently, what's the atmosphere in Europe right now? Do they seem a way? Do they see a way out of this? Maybe perhaps a consensus where all parties agree.
I had to give a speech to the combined parliaments of Europe, or all of the national parliaments, and talk about some work that I had been doing for them on what's happening in privacy. And I had to admit that after a year of study and thousands of interviews, there were 27 points of privacy that I could say unequivocally everyone agreed that they disagreed with.
Right.
And that was the only thing in common. The reality is companies still are suspicious of strong privacy law. Governments are suspicious of it very often. But all in Europe are bound by what we call Article 8. It's the fundamental right of privacy. It's a constitutional guarantee. India has a constitutional guarantee of privacy. It's not yet been formulated in so many words, but in Europe it has been. And so the mood in Europe is, look, we have to get this right. It's a legal requirement. It's worked fairly well so far. It's a relatively buoyant economy. It's in growth, sort of. You can't blame privacy for any slowdown in industrial growth. What it has done is inspire confidence that information will be processed in the right way.
Right.
And that's the important part, because you will discover in India that as people go online, as they put more information online, work through their mobile phones, they're going to need that confidence.
Simon, we'll take a small break right now. We'll come back and I'd like to speak about issues directly related to India, the Justice Shah report as well, which you've started as well. We'll come back with Simon Davies immediately after the break. Don't go anywhere, lots more to come on the other side. Welcome back to our special program, To The Point. Simon Davies is still with us. Simon, you spoke about the Justice Shah report. Now, that commission was set up particularly to actually look into privacy issues. Has the report that's come out, and you, I'm assuming, have read this, do you think it's comprehensive enough for a country like India with such diverse opinions, political, otherwise, what have you, to actually get some consensus building on those issues that Justice Shah has recommended?
I was, when Justice A.P. Shah produced this report, I was profoundly impressed. He created 9 principles, he and his committee, and those 9 principles would resonate with all developed democracies that have privacy law. So you wouldn't have an argument with Europe, for example, about this big trade in personal data that's being processed in India. You won't have an argument with them about a disparity, because Justice Shah's recommendations, I think, chime perfectly with what's happening in Europe. Where Justice Shah, I think, ran for cover is he dodged the issue of how do you regulate industry. Now, yes, he did put a chapter into that. But even this week, I went to a meeting in Delhi with quite a few big businesses, all of whom were saying, we can't have government regulation. India is too complex. And people don't trust a regulator. They don't trust another commissioner.
I think that's a global trend anyway.
It is. And we've heard it in America, for example, for the last 30 years. But America actually has a whole quilt of laws that control, plus a lot of activity, a lot of actions that individuals can take through the courts if anything happens to their personal information. But anyway, getting back to Justice Shah, if his recommendations would be adopted and adopted swiftly by the Parliament, and if a way through could be found in terms of setting up a commissioner, a regulator, to guide self-regulation, Europe will breathe a sigh of relief. It means that Europe won't have to be trigger happy about its law and overreact, because at the moment there's some bad feeling about how Europe's got to go through all of this process, whereas India just reaps a profit from the data that Europe sends across. Well, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But if you look at something like, let's look at a well-known Indian company like VSF Global. VSF Global processes visas.
Visa applications. Yeah.
Exactly. They process the equivalent of the population of a medium-sized or large European country, 60 million visas. Where is that information held? What do we know about it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Who has all these details about citizens of a country?
Well, is it held in Mumbai and Delhi? Is it held in the ocean somewhere? We don't know. No information is given. The privacy policy for VSF Global just says we do what we want with your data.
Which is a very scary thought.
Well, yes, and this is a lot of information. I mean, I filled my visa application for India is the sort of thing that I would have expected to get national security clearance. It was multiple pages. It asked about...
And there is no such thing that exists with VSF? National security clearance and everything else?
No, I mean, but it's the equivalent, it's the sort of information you would have to supply if you wanted that. So, for example, everything from the tattoo on my wrist to my facial biometric to everything, all my grandparents and parents' details is being held somewhere. Europe wants to know where, what controls, what safeguards, and VSF is only one of thousands of companies dealing with Europe. So, as you can see, there's an anxiety now to get things right, and India has an opportunity in accepting the Shah recommendations, and in fact maybe going one better, to impress Europe to the point where it sees India as a leader, as a leader of legislation and thought.
There's a similar worry that's come up ever since. Facebook is obviously huge all over the world. India is no exception. They launched this thing called Facebook Home, and apparently that was, the idea of the owners of Facebook to maximize revenue. Now, do you think Facebook Home has similar problems because, you can amass all sorts of data about a user, and they won't tell anyone who they want to share it with, and that will drive the revenue because it's all ad generated anyway. Do you think that there's a case to be made for privacy, online privacy there as well?
Yes, I believe so. In fact, if let's just turn our attention for a moment to the entire of Facebook. Facebook isn't the animal it used to be. I remember
it's changed.
It's changed a lot as it went public, its IPO. The reality is, I used to train Facebook's engineers. We had a tremendous relationship. The company had a spirit of community. Then the business managers got a hold of
Then
Facebook,
they went public.
And of course, then it all became, how do we project and do risk assessment for the following 4 to 5 years. At that point, everybody I had worked with disappeared suddenly. It was like
and the suits came in.
Yeah, exactly. It was like a mafia plot. Suddenly there's in a casino. Everything changed. Now the thing is that now every decision that is made in Facebook has to be revenue directed, whereas before it was directed to the community. And I think so. We're looking at a different animal. So people, in the same way they used to look at Google with great affection, what a cool company. Right. Now they don't necessarily do that. they've got to stop seeing Facebook as a bunch of, friendly guys out there in Silicon Valley doing their best for
They're
the
all
world.
people out to make money, and we should be seeing that.
It's the advertising industry, and the advertising industry, and this country India is very sensitive to this, because if you start bombarding people, for example, with marketing messages on their mobile phones, they're going to...
People don't like it at all. I want to talk a bit about, you're in India, you've been in India for a couple of days now, and you go back soon. But you had some closed-door meetings in New Delhi. I won't ask you to divulge really what really happened, because it's a closed-door meeting. But who all did you meet here, and what is the atmosphere that you see in New Delhi, at least, the capital of the country, regarding making this movement slightly bigger, slightly more popular among people?
Well, the meeting I had, it was a single meeting over most of a day, was with government officials and industry representatives from the chambers of commerce through to large corporations, eBay, Google, Microsoft. And we'd spent a lot of the time talking to each other about perceptions, about culture, and about the options that were open. The government figures were saying that there is a willingness to proceed. But I was disappointed, because a lot of industry still, they said two things that worried me. The first is, well, privacy isn't really in Indian culture. I disagree with that. I absolutely disagree.
Any sane person would.
Exactly. And in fact, there was a report, university report, released last October, which showed that the levels of concern in India about privacy are about the same as they are in any other country. There is this myth about Indian train travel that you will know, which is everyone spills their life to strangers on an Indian train. Well, yeah, they do, but like Las Vegas, what stays on the train, what's said in the train stays in the train. Right. You'll never see those people again.
Right.
Online, it will be known forever. Europe's trying to stop that now.
The internet is not written in pencil, it's written in ink. It never goes away. On that note, Simon, I'll take another small break. We'll come back, we'll talk about the future of online privacy, and where are we moving from now on, and how badly was that decision that was taken in 2008? Has that affected the war for online privacy in the current day context? We'll take another small break. Simon Davies returns on the other side of this break. Don't go anywhere, stay tuned. Welcome back to The Point. Simon Davies is still with us. Simon, what is the outlook on the future with regard to India, and also globally, because you're working globally for the issue as well? Where do you see it going, really? Governments seem to be cooperating. They seem to be doing all they can. Regulators in Europe, and perhaps now even in India, will start to work. But more consensus is needed, and more consultation is needed. Is that correct?
First, I suppose we need to take a look at exactly what we are facing. And this is not just for India, this is the world. It's going to be a borderless world. The whole push is to eliminate those boundaries between what we do, what we say, what is said about us, where we say it, how we say it, what technology we use. There'll be no barriers. It'll be a seamless, endless flow of information about us that can be used in a billion different ways. That's the new world that we're facing. We call it ubiquitous ambient computing. In other words, we become part of the system. Right. Now, this is a way off for much of Europe, and certainly in India. But we will become the part of a vast information system. One of the component products that produces the data, that feeds the advertising, that fuels the investment, that generates more profits and more information that we can use.
More and more drives the economy, really.
Exactly. Now, I'll have an argument about whether advertising actually drives all of this, or whether it's actually value of the information, but that's irrelevant. The reality is that the future is about us being carried along in this huge tidal wave of information. Now,
do we have any lifeboats?
Well, yeah, that's a very interesting analogy, because we always saw privacy law as being almost like the motorway that you build through through this desert, and along the way are laybys and lifeboats, ways that you can actually hop off if you need to, if there's an emergency, if there's a data crisis, because companies, for example, lose vast amounts of information. would have no idea, particularly in India where there isn't a regulation here, that every day data on millions of people it'll just disappear. No one will know where it's gone. It'll be stolen, it'll be traded under the shelf for money, or just simply lost in the post. And without a regulation, of course, no one knows what happens. Imagine that in 5 years' time, when all of our lives are on such a system. I mean, your UID, your Universal Identifier in this country, and the National Population Register, combined, are producing a nationwide system of vast proportions. Globally, this is huge, what you're doing. It's also collapsing in places, but that's another subject.
That's another debate altogether. Yeah.
But the reality is that it was an ambitious project that's collecting vast amounts of information with very little framework, very little, as you would say, lifeboats or motorway. So highly dangerous. And I don't know a country outside of China that's tried it on this scale.
I want to talk about China as well. We don't have much time, but let's talk about China for a bit now. Now, China is a completely different animal altogether. They have strict and hard government control over everything, including the internet, including information. Now, they've been at loggerheads with Google as well. Where do you see China, and is China even doing anything about privacy, online privacy? Because they don't really care about that, do they?
Interestingly, 2 of the regions in China have started to shift now. Hong Kong, of course, though it is an autonomous region, has its own commissioner, privacy commissioner. But 2 of the mainland regions in China have decided that, in fact, financial information particularly is crucially important and needs protection. So they've brought data protection into China. And there is talk, in fact, there are several bills pending for online protection. Now, okay, this is mainly to do with the state being able to intervene. But the reality is China is starting to see the importance of stabilizing the information market. They need foreign investment in the technology. Well, they don't need it. They ideally would want it.
They would want it, yes.
Yeah. So they have to show willing too. And the thing is that data is valuable, and Chinese authorities have personal information they want protected as well.
What about the US? I mean, there is a new boss of the Federal Trade Council or Commission, FTC, that they have over there, Edith Ramirez, I think. And the moment she came into office, she made a statement that she was going to fight for online privacy, and that fight was going to continue. What is the mood like in the US right now with a new boss of the FTC who seems to be at least pro-privacy and quite gung-ho about protecting the privacy of online users? Do you think there's a good shift in mindset in the US?
I was actually last month at the FTC having coffee with one of the commissioners, who's an old friend of mine, and so I got first-hand very recently the mood. The mood, as it's been explained to me, is that if the FTC can get out of its political corner, and the problem is that the FTC is a very political organisation, if people can agree to be far more public about the issues rather than playing politics in the background, then I think there will be a new era for protection in the US, and that will resonate across the world as well. Because the US has stalled privacy protection for as long as it can, and now that's coming to an end.
Right. One last question, Simon, before we go. You've seen the mood in Europe, the mood in the US, and now you've seen the mood in India. Do you think Europe is still leading the way in perhaps formulating some sort of a concrete semblance of a policy which everyone could agree on? Or is Europe still taking the lead, and does it need more help from countries like the US and India?
I think Europe, because Europe again negotiates all of its law, it's a very complex negotiation as it is here. Europe hasn't got it right. I think Europe did lead the way for 30 years on data protection, but now it is seeking support and enlightenment. I think it does need India we need champions in India who are prepared to go to Europe and say, look, you want a strong economic relationship with us? How about we work it in the following way? But until that discussion is had, Europe will have to second guess what India needs. And of course, if that means a prohibition, then that will happen. And it's nothing personal, it's just the way the law is.
It also slows things down and unnecessarily.
It does, and it would be a terrible blight on the economy. So those regions, your region and Europe have got to start talking seriously. I mean, I brought on my blog, privacysurgeon.org, I regularly report on what Europe is up to. It's those sort of reports which actually are very disturbing, because what they show you is that Europe is in dysfunction, but wants to do the right thing.
But is being hampered by the lack of cooperation.
This is it. No, well, everybody's speaking with a different voice. But now, because we've gone so far down this path, now decisions have to be made very fast in the current term of the European Parliament. And there is a desperation to talk to India, to talk to China, and try and sort these things out, these big data questions. But we don't have long. I think we've got maybe 3 months.
Right. Now, on that note, Simon, on that quite grim note, I must end the show. Many thanks, Simon Davies, for joining us on To The Point. That was Simon Davies, founder of Privacy International and global warrior who's fighting the good war for online privacy. That's all the time we have on To The Point this week. Till next time, goodbye.